The summer air hung thick and warm over the sprawling estate in Connecticut. Margaret Wellington stood at the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of her father's study, watching the groundskeepers tend to the endless green lawns that stretched toward the distant tree line. At 17, she had grown accustomed to the quiet luxury that surrounded her daily life, but today felt different somehow. Her father, Charles Wellington, was one of the wealthiest men in New England. His business empire had grown from a small manufacturing company into a global corporation over the past 30 years. The Wellington name appeared on buildings, scholarships, and charity foundations across the country. But despite all the success and recognition, Charles had always maintained that his greatest achievement was his daughter, Margaret. Margaret had always been the center of her father's world. After her mother passed away when she was just 5 years old, Charles had devoted himself entirely to raising his little girl. He made sure she had the best education, the finest opportunities, and most importantly, all the love and attention a child could need. They were a team, just the two of them against the world. This particular Tuesday morning started like any other. Margaret had finished her online tutoring session and was looking forward to spending the afternoon with her father. He had promised to take her into the city to visit the new art gallery that had just opened downtown. These small adventures, together, were what she treasured most about their relationship. As she waited for her father to finish his morning business calls, Margaret decided to take a walk around the property. The estate covered nearly 200 acres, with winding paths through carefully maintained gardens and a small lake that reflected the old oak trees along its banks. She often came here when she needed to think or simply wanted to enjoy the peaceful solitude. But as she rounded the corner near the main entrance, she stopped in her tracks. There, sitting in a wheelchair on the front steps, was a girl who looked to be about her own age. The girl had long, dark hair, similar to Margaret's own, and was wearing a simple blue dress. She appeared to be waiting for someone. Margaret felt a strange flutter in her chest. Something about this girl seemed familiar, though she was certain they had never met. The girl's profile, the way she held her hands folded in her lap, even the gentle slope of her shoulders, it all felt like looking into a mirror somehow. "Excuse me?" Margaret called out softly, approaching the steps. "Are you waiting for someone?" The girl in the wheelchair turned toward her, and Margaret felt her breath catch. The resemblance was unmistakable. They had the same dark eyes, the same delicate features, the same warm smile. It was like seeing a reflection of herself. "I'm waiting for Mr. Wellington," the girl replied in a voice that was surprisingly similar to Margaret's own. "My name is Sarah. I'm supposed to meet with him this morning." Margaret's mind began racing. Why would her father be meeting with this girl? And why hadn't he mentioned it to her? They shared everything with each other, every detail of their days, every plan, every thought. This secrecy felt completely out of character for him. "I'm Margaret," she said, extending her hand. "Charles Wellington is my father." Sarah's eyes widened with recognition and something else, perhaps nervousness or excitement. "Oh," she said quietly, "I wondered if I might meet you today." Before Margaret could ask what she meant, the sound of footsteps echoed from inside the house. Her father appeared in the doorway, and Margaret watched as his face went through a series of emotions: surprise, concern, and something that looked almost like fear. "Margaret," he said carefully, "I wasn't expecting you to be out here." "Dad," Margaret said, her voice trembling slightly, "who is this?" Charles Wellington stood frozen for a moment, his eyes moving between his daughter and the girl in the wheelchair. Finally, he took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Margaret, sweetheart, I need to tell you something that I should have told you a long time ago," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "This is Sarah. She's your sister." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Margaret felt the world tilt around her, as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly become unsteady. Her sister. How could she have a sister? She had always been an only child, the sole focus of her father's love and attention. "I don't understand," Margaret whispered. Charles sat down on the steps between the two girls, his hands clasped tightly together. "After your mother died, I was lost," he began slowly. "I threw myself into work, trying to deal with the grief. During that time I met Sarah's mother, Elena. It was a brief relationship, but Sarah was born from it." He paused, struggling to find the right words. Elena was a wonderful woman, but she was sick. She had multiple sclerosis, and it was getting worse. When Sarah was born, Elena knew she wouldn't be able to care for her properly as the disease progressed. She asked me to take Sarah, but I was so focused on you, on making sure you were okay after losing your mother, that I couldn't see how to bring another child into our lives. Margaret looked at Sarah, who was listening to this story with tears streaming down her face. It was clear that Sarah had known about her existence for some time. "Elena and I arranged for Sarah to be raised by a loving family," Charles continued. "The Hendersons were wonderful people who couldn't have children of their own. They loved Sarah like she was their own daughter. But Elena made me promise that when Sarah turned 18, I would tell her about her true parentage and give her the choice to be part of our family if she wanted." "Sarah is 17 now," he said, looking at both girls. "She contacted me a few months ago after the Hendersons told her about her origins. We've been meeting regularly, getting to know each other. I wanted to tell you, Margaret, but I wasn't sure how. I was afraid you might feel like I was replacing you, or that our relationship would change." Margaret felt a storm of emotions washing over her. Anger that her father had kept this secret. Confusion about how to process this new reality. But underneath it all, she felt something else, a strange sense of completeness, as if a piece of her that she didn't even know was missing had suddenly been found. She looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and saw not a threat or a stranger, but a part of herself that she had never known existed. Sarah's wheelchair didn't define her. It was simply part of who she was. Her smile was warm and genuine, and her eyes held the same kindness that Margaret had always seen in her father. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly. "I didn't want to disrupt your life. I just wanted to know where I came from, to understand who I am." Margaret reached out and took Sarah's hand. "You're not disrupting anything," she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "You're my sister. I've always wanted a sister." Charles Wellington watched as his two daughters sat together on the front steps of his home, and for the first time in years he felt like his family was complete. The secret he had carried for so long was finally out in the open, and rather than destroying the relationships he cherished most, it had created something new and beautiful. Over the following weeks, Margaret and Sarah spent countless hours together, sharing stories, dreams, and the simple joy of sisterhood. They discovered they both loved reading mystery novels, had the same favorite color, and shared an unusual talent for solving crossword puzzles. Sarah moved into the Wellington estate, and the house that had once felt vast and quiet now echoed with laughter and conversation. Margaret learned that Sarah's wheelchair was the result of a genetic condition she had inherited from her mother, but it had never held her back from living a full and vibrant life. Sarah was an accomplished artist, a voracious reader, and had a quick wit that kept Margaret laughing for hours. As autumn painted the Connecticut landscape in brilliant reds and golds, Margaret stood once again at the windows of her father's study. But this time she wasn't alone. Sarah was beside her, sketching the view while they talked about their plans for the future. I used to think I had everything I could ever want, Margaret said softly. But I was wrong. I was missing you. Sarah smiled and set down her pencil. I spent my whole life wondering what it would be like to have a real sister. Now I know it's even better than I imagined. Charles Wellington joined them at the window, putting his arms around both of his daughters. His family was no longer just two people against the world. It was three, and they were stronger together than they had ever been apart. The secret that had once seemed so impossible to share had become the foundation for a new kind of happiness, one built on truth, love, and the unbreakable bond between sisters who had found each other at last.